there is one place only to start over the last 24 hours or so, and that is Myles Lewis-Skelly. Now, this is something that we haven't talked about it much, I don't think. May have mentioned it in passing. I think I'd pretty much written off Myles Lewis-Skelly leaving Arsenal from about April, May. Maybe it was a possibility at some point down the line in the past, but this has come up over the last few days again. So offered to United and Chelsea this week, doesn't want to leave Arsenal, and they don't want to sell him. What's going on?
Yeah, this was anybody that kind of follows the Arsenal sort of media train would have been really confused by what happened yesterday. So initially in the morning, there was a story broken by Football.London. The Arsenal guy involved in it, Tom Canton, is a good friend of mine. And basically the story was that Arsenal, it wasn't anything to do with Arsenal, actually. All it said was that Myles Lewis-Skelly had been offered to Chelsea. Now, my assumption here is that Chelsea had briefed this story, that Chelsea had gone, because it was the Chelsea reporter at Football.London that led with the story. I think Tom Canton helped him put it together and stuff, and did a bit of digging around it to try and kind of verify certain bits and pieces. But essentially, it came from the Chelsea side that Myles Lewis-Skelly had been offered to Chelsea, and then a lot of other reporters, including Ben Jacobs and various others, then went on to say Manchester United have been offered the player as well. So Arsenal fans were in meltdown, and it's not the first time, and it won't be the last time that you see an overreaction online.
It's a commonality in football, isn't it?
Exactly. So there was a massive meltdown. Why on earth are we selling Myles Lewis-Skelly? Why are we actively looking to sell Myles Lewis-Skelly? I guess the problem with this piece was that it didn't specify who had offered Myles Lewis-Skelly to Chelsea and then essentially to Manchester United as well. And what that does is when something's not clear, it creates almost a vacuum for people to kind of add their own bits onto the story and turn the thing into something that a lot of the time it's not. So later on in the day, you then see from The Athletic, from Gunner blog, James McNicholas, who's brilliant on Arsenal, that Myles Lewis-Skelly wants to stay. They have no idea where this stuff's come from. His camp basically firmly deny that this is true, or that he wants to leave. They don't necessarily say that it's not true that he's been offered. They just say that he doesn't want to leave. So then Arsenal fans, what are you going to do from there? Well, you're going to want to point the finger at somebody. And if you're hearing that he's been offered to other clubs, and you're hearing from his people that they've got no intention of leaving, well, there's only one person left to point the finger at, right? And in this case, it's Andrea Berta and Arsenal Football Club. A lot of Arsenal fans, myself included, when they first read that, assumed that it was the club then going, you know what, we've just spent all this money on Bruno Guimaraes. We want to go big on another forward player as well. This player probably isn't going to play as much now that Bruno's come in. Let's cash in on him because he's a homegrown player. There's a market for him, and we're going to get a good chunk of money in through the door. That was the assumption that Arsenal fans made, and that created a bit of a frustration that was aimed and directed towards the football club. One thing that I've learned, though, over the course of this summer, and I'm sure you'll agree on this, is that the transfer world has become so complex, and there's so much information all the time, some of which is true, some of which is not, some of which is contradictory. You have to take everything with a pinch of salt initially. And we learned from the Bruno Guimaraes deal, where for months we're hearing Arsenal are closing in on a deal and Newcastle are denying everything. We realized that actually intermediaries have a massive part to play in these things. And a club can deny an involvement in something because officially they're not engaged in talks, or they're not, seeking to do a deal as far as, they want to make out publicly. But that doesn't mean stuff isn't happening. So what I think has happened here is that an intermediary has got involved and said to Chelsea, if you fancy, and to Manchester United, if you fancy a bit of Myles Lewis-Skelly, we can maybe take something to Arsenal here, and potentially there is scope for a deal. That's what I think has happened. I'm not going to sit here and say that the Chelsea reporter that said he'd been offered is lying, because I don't know any better. I'm not going to say that what he's saying is not accurate, because, again, I don't know any better. I've never claimed to be, and I never will claim to be, an ITK, because, I think that's a really dangerous game to play when you don't have the contacts. So I'm not doing that. I'm not going to sit here and say anybody's wrong or that they're lying, but I also don't think that Myles Lewis-Skelly is going to leave Arsenal. And Arsenal have since firmly denied that the player's even under consideration for a sale. So I think this is a bit of a non-starter, but it just goes to show that when there's a lot of people involved and intermediaries are working the way that they are this day and age, you've just got to take everything with a pinch of salt. It's like Chinese whispers. Everybody adds their bit on, and sometimes you get a story that, maybe isn't quite on the right track.
Yeah, it certainly caught me by surprise. I mean, I've been trying to think about like how this has come about in the first place. And you mentioned the Bruno chase there, and maybe we'll talk about him in a little bit. But the fact that that was going on for so long, I saw you, I've tuned into your podcast at times as well and seen you talk about this and seen you tweet about it and that kind of thing. The role of intermediaries in that transfer in particular, it seemed like it went on for ages and ages. Like, I'm just wondering, like, who are they working on behalf of in a sense, or are they just like meddling? I don't know exactly. If there's no confirmation on the club side that they're looking, if the player doesn't want to leave, it's an odd one, isn't it? It really is. Have you seen the Athletics bit on Wednesday morning as well?
Yeah.
So I'll just run through that because it is new, and I haven't touched on it really in the last 24 hours since I did an initial reaction to this. But the Athletics said, I think this was James McNicholas, Simon Johnson, and Laurie Whitwell as well, who did a like what we're hearing on Myles Lewis-Skelly kind of thing. So Gabby Jesus, Reece Nelson, and Fabio Vieira have proven more difficult to move on. Arsenal would listen to attractive offers for Martinelli or Nwaneri, but appropriate bids haven't materialised. They do not actively want to lose Lewis-Skelly, but Arsenal recognise their approach to sales in the next couple of weeks may have to be flexible, and their capacity to generate revenues via sales is ultimately determined by the market and those players that are attracting interest. If buyers for the expected departures fail to come forward, Arsenal may be willing to entertain offers for a wider group of players. Is an interesting one. Like that was a thing that stood out to me, and maybe this is kind of where this is. I don't know how much traction it's really got at the moment. I don't think this will come off for whatever reason. I think United will end up pivoting back to Lewis Hall personally, but it is interesting that this is just out there. Those players I've named there, Jesus, Nelson, Vieira, Martinelli, Nwaneri, how likely are they to go? And how likely might it be that they do turn to a sale of this down the line if those players aren't getting interest, you think?
I would be really, really disappointed if they were to go, well, we can't get what we want for those guys, so let's let Myles Lewis-Skelly go. Because, listen, he came into the team initially as a left back and he did really, really well. And then the second season, he dropped off a little bit at left back in terms of, just being switched on defensively and all the rest of it. But everybody knew that Myles was a midfield player at heart. That's what he was as he came through the ranks. Got a chance at left back, took it with both hands, fair play to him. But everybody knew he was a midfield player. And to come in at the business end of last season and play the way he did and keep Martin Zubimendi out of the team and even in the Champions League final, keep him on the bench. Every week was passing, Scott, and Arsenal fans were going, this is the week, surely, where he's going to bring Zubimendi back in. And he just didn't. And Myles performed each and every one of those times. So for him to have kind of played his way into this status at Arsenal, and then for Arsenal to go, well, we can't get money for Fabio Vieira and Gabriel Jesus and the likes, Reece Nelson, so we'll sell him instead. That would be so disappointing. And it would go against everything that Arsenal have told us about their ambition and what this project is all about. Ultimately, Arsenal have been bad sellers for quite some time. The record fee they've got in for a player is still that fee for Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain, right?
It's mad that Arsenal are worse than United at this. Crazy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like there'll be people that go, this is, it's Edu over the last few years, not good enough at selling, or Berta now, not good enough at selling. Ultimately, if there is no market for those players, then how do you sell them? You can't, click your fingers or hypnotize someone into thinking that Reece Nelson is worth 30 million quid, because he's just not. And the same with someone like Fabio Vieira as well. I would be so disappointed if they were to go, actually, we're not going to get the money in that we expected from these guys, so let's lose Myles Lewis-Skelly. Sorry, but that wouldn't wash with me. That would be really, really poor management. Ultimately, those guys have been, their exits have been written on the wall for quite some time. Jesus, since the injury problems, has never been seen as a viable option for Arsenal going forward. He's always been a bit part player since. Reece Nelson, how many loan spells is Reece Nelson going to go on before we actually move him on? Vieira's been on loan. Hamburg won him, but Arsenal won't compromise on their asking price. How about you compromise on the asking price instead of losing someone that will be key moving forward? So, yeah, I'd be bitterly disappointed if that was the case. But what that does show, that part of the Athletic story, is that people that are having a go at the two lads that initially reported that he'd been offered to other clubs, actually, now hold on a minute, there may be something at play here. It may not be directly from club to club, but it doesn't mean there's nothing in this whatsoever. And actually, I think the Bruno Guimaraes thing should have taught us that clubs can deny whatever they want to deny. It does not mean that conversations aren't taking place in the background. And as I say, the transfer world is so murky nowadays. You just don't know what's coming, do you? You just don't know.
Yeah, it's particularly difficult for United fans this summer. They've only signed, well, really two players properly. And you can count Carl Darlow in a sense, I guess, but that doesn't really count, does it? I'm looking at this and thinking United need more, but they're not telling anybody anything. Yeah. They haven't signed a player for like a month now, Yuri Tielemans, and there's obvious like massive holes in this team that it's frustrating because I look at the United squad at the moment and I think if you do just sign 2 or 3 players, I think you could have a really potentially good season and compete on a lot of fronts. But my next question, I've already answered it really, is I'm guessing you're not going to be pleased by this if it were to come about.
No, it shouldn't happen. It simply shouldn't happen. If I'm being honest, though, if I'm, speaking truthfully here, if you'd have come to me with this in February, if someone had come to me in February and said, Chelsea and Man United are sniffing around Myles Lewis-Skelly and you could potentially get 60, 65 million for him, I might have done it if I were Arsenal Football Club, because at that time, he was out in the cold. He wasn't getting a look in at left back. There was Calafiori and Nkapie both comfortably and rightfully so in front of him in terms of what they were bringing to the team in that role. In midfield, you never got the sense that Arteta trusted him there because he wasn't getting picked. And, neither was Christian Norgard, actually, which was interesting. You got the sense that Mikel didn't feel that he could go with anything other than Rice and Zubimendi. And that was problematic for Arsenal in the end because both of those players were running to the ground. Rice went to the World Cup with one leg, basically. And now, he's back, but, how long is he going to need to get up to speed again? So you just didn't see it happening. But it did come to light afterwards when Myles gave an interview post the season that he'd been training as a midfield player from about February time. So clearly there was a plan in place to mold him into what he maybe should have been at the start of his career and get him up to speed in that area. Maybe it was recognition from Arteta that Norgard's not good enough and we don't have enough other options. Let me give this kid a go. He obviously showed something in training because he was selected in the biggest of games and then he did brilliantly well. And I just think if you're going to invest that time into a player, if you're going to show that faith in him, to then do a complete U-turn a few months later when he's done nothing wrong since, just to gain financial reward, means that everything that Arsenal tell everybody right now, which is, we're a club that wants to be self-sustainable, of course, but we're also in a great place right now and we want to build on that and we want to create a dynasty. That's what they keep saying. Then you'd be completely contradicting that if you went, well, someone's made a semi-decent offer for our player, let's let him go. You're going to need all 4 of Rice, Zubimendi, Myles Lewis-Skelly and Bruno Guimaraes if Arsenal are going to play 65 games again over the course of a season. So keep him. I'd be furious if he goes. I'd be livid with it.
Yeah, I was thinking that as well. I've been looking at how he would potentially fit into the United team because, I know he's not a left back, right? And it's no secret really that he wants to play in midfield, really. But the line out of United at the moment is, well, we don't have enough money, really. They got back in the Champions League. They're announcing deals with Betway, and we all know of the financial issues that United have had in the past and what they're trying to do, I guess. But I'm looking at this situation. I'm thinking, is there a left back / central midfield cover player that United could potentially go for? And in that same Athletic piece this morning, they've essentially hinted at the same thing and named Eduardo Camavinga as another player like that too. I don't know how United are going to go forward with this, but just on that left back central midfield discussion around him, he broke into the team at left back, obviously. Would you consider him now one of that quartet, given you've got Calafiori and Nkapie out there on the left? If he does leave, really, surely Arsenal are going to need to backfill that position because I don't think they consider Marino as a central midfielder anymore. How does that work?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think one of the brilliant things about Myles Lewis-Skelly is that he can play both those roles, right? He is the 3rd choice left back at Arsenal. Make no mistake about that. He's not ahead of Calafiori. He's not ahead of Nkapie. But then again, Calafiori's injury problems that he's had since not just since coming to Arsenal, but they go right back to his days in Italy. You know, that always means that Myles Lewis-Skelly's never that far away from having to tuck in at left back and fulfill that role. So if Arsenal were to lose him, they'd have to, in my opinion, think about both of those areas of the pitch. Mikel Merino, I think Arsenal consider as more a kind of makeshift centre forward /10 now. And he's not a creative type of 10. He's a box crashing type of 10. That's what he is. I don't think they'd use him unless they really had to in one of those deeper midfield positions. And I think when you talk about playing against low blocks a lot, which is what Arsenal face quite often, having someone like Myles, whose biggest superpower for me is being able to get the ball, get his head down and drive through the lines. He's so good at using his body and putting his body in the way. And if it means he's going to lose the ball, he uses his body to win a foul in the process. He's really good at that, like really good at that. I think it's just a type of player that we'd lose a type of player that we don't have a lot of cover for, and we'd have to go out and buy again. For Man United, because it's a Man United podcast, if I was looking at him, I'd be thinking midfield first and foremost, because I think that's where his future lies. The fact that he can play at left back is great to have, but I honestly think that what we saw from him over the last few months was him going, I'm not a left back anymore. Like the way he took on that role and the way he started to just play it as if he'd been playing it for 10 years prior at the highest level. From an Arsenal perspective, where we were watching him every single week and really, really closely, I find it quite difficult to envisage him going back to being a left back predominantly. I think he could fill in there if you needed him to. But even when he plays at left back, he's always got that tendency to go into the middle of the pitch. And when you've got an absolute monster like Gabriel playing at left centre back, who says, go and do that, and I'll sweep up and clear up the space that you leave behind you, that's okay in most games. But do Man United have that? You'll know better than me. And you know, is he going to be happy with going into a team as predominantly a left back? Because I'm assuming that's what United would want him for, right?
I'm trying to work this out myself. I mean, like the big conversation at the moment is Luke Shaw played 38 Premier League games last season, and that was considered a miracle. You've got Mason Mount in the midfield who, talking about getting rid of players and how people just want the parts of your team which aren't really that useful to just be sold on. It's not as simple, really, as just selling them on, really, is it? Because Mason Mount, who's going to buy an injured player, consistently, and Mason Mount's now injured again after the friendly at the weekend. He's missing the Leeds game tonight, which is just poetic, really, given all of the conversation about considering him as the third midfielder. And that just, it's got no legs at all for me. But the way I was looking at Lewis-Skelly really was, could United potentially offer him, if like speaking theoretically here, could they offer him like long-term a position in this central midfield, but with the caveat that we just do need cover at left back potentially for the season, but we'll rely on Luke Shaw and you'll get plenty of game time in either position. And then next year we'll sign a left back if they can't do like a Lewis Hall and a Lewis-Skelly in the same summer, because they cover kill two birds with one stone essentially. But are any weaknesses in his game that you notice? And one, I was tweeting about him yesterday, talking about him potentially playing left back, and someone pointed out to me that if Cunha plays, he likes to drift inside, and if Lewis-Skelly's doing the same thing, that doesn't make sense because United will need an overlap. Is the inverting thing more of a coach instruction, do you think, or is that natural in his game? Do you think that if it was instructed to go wide, he could be effective there too?
I think for me, I think there is a natural inclination on Myles Lewis-Skelly's part to drift inside because that's the part of the pitch that he feels most comfortable. He doesn't like being isolated as a left back against the winger. And if you are going to pick faults in his game, you'd say that that's the problem. He's strong, but he's not the quickest across the ground. I'm not saying he's slow, but he hasn't got that amazing pace that if a winger knocks it past you and bursts into a sprint, that he's always going to be able to keep up with them. That's not his game at all. What I think he does do quite well when he plays at left back is that he recognizes that. And so what he would do at Arsenal is, rather than allowing there to be space in between himself and the centre-back that could potentially be exploited, he's very good at tucking in and getting close to Gabriel and saying, play on the outside of us. And then I've got a chance of blocking the cross or whatever. And if it does go into the box, I know that we've got what we need there to defend it because I've stayed narrow with you. He doesn't go out and confront and leave spaces in between himself and the centre back. He's very aware of what his flaws are, and he'll look at it and he'll say, no, I'm going to get close to Gabriel here and we're going to defend this as a unit. And that sometimes prevents his kind of 1v1 thing being exposed a little bit. Can he play on the outside? Can he make overlapping runs? I don't see why not. Like, he is a left-footed player. He has got a good passing range. He's got a decent delivery on him when he gets into those positions. Like, we've seen him get to the corner of the box quite a lot rather than going around the outside. He comes to the corner of the box and you see him often put his foot on the ball, have a look up and clip it into the box. So he can do that, which makes me feel that he'd be fine going on the outside, but it's not something that comes to him naturally. So it's something that have to be coached into him. And then obviously there's that risk that doesn't really, work with him. So I'm not saying he can't do those things, but I think at Arsenal, it's almost been over the last few years, we've almost got to the point where it's like, this is what Myles is. Let's not try and make him something he's not. He's a 19-year-old kid. Let's focus on his strengths and let's try and extract as much out of him as we can. And knowing that you've got either Gabriel inside of him or Declan Rice playing just in front of him, those guys have been able to really help, I think, cover some of his flaws. And that's why he's had the stint that he's had in the Arsenal team and had the minutes he's had at this young age.
Yeah. Final one on Lewis-Skelly before we shift on. How likely, you've already said you don't think it'll happen, right? But I'm guessing you're worried a little bit about it. And if, like, say, a price of 55, 60 was slapped on the table from a Big Six rival, do you think Arsenal would genuinely consider that?
I want to say no, but everything I'm reading suggests that they might. There was the report initially yesterday that we talked about. There was the bit in The Athletic this morning that you've highlighted. None of that says definitively that he's not going. So there is a tiny bit of me that is worried about it, that is worried that if the right money's on the table, Arsenal will take it. I don't think they should, but since when did anybody care about what I think? I think there's a good chance that if there's big money on the table, they'd at the very least consider it, regardless of what they say publicly and what they're briefing people. Yeah,
I don't know whether Chelsea will move for it. Chelsea have got, as we pointed out in the past, Chelsea have got about 100 million players. They've just signed a new left back again this morning. Yeah. Enzo Fernandez could go to Man City. I don't know. Maybe they'll look at if that actually happens. For what it's worth, I do think that United are looking more at Lewis Hall, and this is just a potential alternative because of that overlapping habit that he has, and because he is actually a bona fide left back. But yeah, let us know your thoughts in the comment section, guys. Do you think this will happen? I personally thought that this was just completely off the table, but it's interesting that it's come back out.